Welcome everybody to Wisconsin Veterans Museum's movie night discussion for July. Thank you for joining us tonight. Sally, nice to see you there briefly.
Oh, hi there.
Yeah, I just, thanks for showing up on this Friday night. And once again, talking movies with me. Before we get started, I just do want to say thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support in our free programming for our virtual events, and also to Generac Power Systems for their continued sponsorship as well. Without both of those organizations, I wouldn't say that we wouldn't be able to do this, but it certainly does make things a lot smoother when we have support and sponsorship. So thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation and to Generac Power Systems for their continued support. Once again, thank you guys for showing up tonight. And this week we are talking, or not this week, this month, we are talking about the 2019 movie, The Last Full Measure. This was directed by Todd Robinson, which is kind of strange, I thought, because he is most noted for his documentaries. Legend of Billy the Kid, which he did for Disney Channel, also Wild Bill, and Amy Cook, too. So I really know him from his documentaries. He has made a couple feature-length motion pictures, this being his latest attempt. And this was also, I went to go look up the producer for this movie. There's 14 different producers. I don't know why they required so many. You usually do not see that many producers associated with the film, but 14 different producers. So there must have been a lot of technical aspects to funding and whatnot. It also stars Sebastian Stan, Ed Harris, Samuel Jackson, Christopher Plummer, Peter Fonda, William Hurt, Diane Ladd. I mean, this is a star-studded cast. And also a regular back to movie night here at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, Captain Dale Dye. We see him in a lot of our movies too. This film was distributed by Roadside Attractions. It took a long time to get this movie off the ground. Many studios wanted to pick it up. A couple of them did, but really just plans fell through. Maybe that's why they had so many producers, is because they had to get a lot of funding for this from the civilian side of Hollywood. So perhaps that's why they had 14 different producers, because they had a lot of work to put in with getting this movie going and up and off the ground. It was released on January 24th of 2020 here in the US. And this is not a good sign. This is the first time I've ever had to say something like this on our program. It had a budget of $20 million. It had a box office receipt of only $3.4 million. So it lost 16 plus million bucks. That's, like I said, that's the first time we've had to say this on this show. Every single movie that we've covered has made money. This one has not. And also, this is the only movie that we've covered so far that has not been nominated for any awards. So I don't know, maybe, I don't know, we'll see what everybody else thinks before we start deciding whether or not this was a good movie or at least up there rankable with other Vietnam movies that we've talked about. And I guess that's the first thing I'll do is I'll just go around and see if everybody liked the film. Chris, what did you think? Did you enjoy it?
I was kind of disappointed. I thought a lot of the characters in there were kind of cardboardy. The other problem I had was when they had the Medal of Honor ceremony, they had it at the that museum, and it was given by the Secretary of the Air Force, as I recall. And I thought that was kind of weird, because usually when we've seen these Medal of Honor presentations, they've been by the president.
At the White House.
At least recently. So that sent me out looking to see if if that's actually how it had happened. And as I was went out there, I found this website called History versus Hollywood, where they look at movies based on real life, on actual facts, and then compare what actually happened with how the movie played it out. And reading through that, what struck me was how far this departed apparently from the entire from Pittsburgh, the whole story about Pitts and Barger's Medal of Honor. The ceremony and the movie apparently was very similar to what happened in real life. And in fact, in the audience, they said that on the Blu-ray version, on the extras, they showed a lot of veterans who had been at the original ceremony also attended this, were in the movie, in that audience. But what really came through was that it kind of, the Washington Post review of it at the time basically said it was a run-of-the-mill movie that could have been much more exciting. And what made it even more disappointing for me was to find out there was no conspiracy. That a lot of these characters were actually made up.
Really?
The senator in the movie didn't exist. Huffman himself was a made-up character.
Really?
So when I found that out, in retrospect, it became an even more disappointing movie for me than it was when I watched it.
Okay, so Robinson, how did you view the film? Did you like it, or?
I did. I actually enjoyed it. I'm a war history buff, and I'm a veteran myself. It was slow, but I think there was an element of redemption for the main character, even though he wasn't an actual person, as I just found out from Chris. I enjoyed the story of his own redemption, and I know we're going to get into the questions, so I don't want to get ahead of myself. But from the perspective of his soul, I saw that transition through the movie. I enjoyed the stories and the needs that were exhibited in the characters that were portraying the veterans who had survived this particular battle. And I enjoyed it. It did get slow in parts. It certainly wasn't an action-packed war movie, but I would actually watch it again.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I saw when I was doing all my research for this, I saw that it wasn't even really labeled a war movie. It was labeled a political drama. So I was like, okay, that I could see how that makes sense. John, Karen, what did you two think?
Well, after last month's movie that I really didn't like, I did like this one. There were a couple things in it that I picked at almost immediately when they were going over the fact that only 13 or 18 enlisted airmen have received the Medal of Honor since the Medal of Honor has been given up. And I had to stop and think and say, well, wait a minute, the Air Force didn't come about till 1947. And most of those people that do the fighting in the Air Force are officers because they're flying planes. So I could see the possibility, but they seem to make it sound like it was a conspiracy that the enlisted Air Force people were not getting Medals of Honor. They were only going to officers. I didn't care for that kind of line, but it didn't continue for long. It was dropped. But I do want to say what Robertson said, that the redemption, Hoffman's redemption, one of the parts of the movie I really enjoyed was the little butterfly enclosure at the site of Abilene. I thought I really liked that part of it. And Kemper, I think, was the guy's name.
In Vietnam.
Kepler.
Yeah. He had his mind cleared of all of the problems that the other guys did have. He just let it go.
Yeah, he was really one of the only ones who had come to peace with his service and his time in Vietnam. Obviously, he stayed there. Sorry, can you guys hear that outside? Is that coming through on the Zoom?
No.
Okay, good. The drummer is doing his sound check. So. But yeah, he seemed to be the only one who found peace, who found his kind of serenity. I did have a question about that. He says that because the operation was called Operation Abilene, and he says Abilene, when he's in that enclosure, says Abilene is now Avalon, and he asks how the two things can coexist in the same place. I just kind of want to get everybody's sense on that quote, and just what you kind of think it means, and maybe how it not only reflects what he's saying, but do you think that applies to maybe soldiers in all wars? that there's a place where they can find their peace? What do you think, Lisa?
Well, I just want to go back to what John said. I wasn't able to join you last month, and I didn't care for that movie either. So anyhow, back to this one. I like this story. It was a hard movie for me to watch because I've just lost my mother. Is everything okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I've just lost my mother within the last 10 months or so. So I'm going through a lot of grief, and she battled cancer. So I see a lot of parallels with war, a war against a disease and a war against. So
Interesting.
that's all. It was a difficult movie. Now you asked about the Avalon. So some of my processing, trying to help myself, is I read a lot of different things, and I've read an article that said that grief and sorrow and joy can exist at the same time. So I think that kind of correlates with the place there where there's tragedy, but yet beauty come to exist.
I apologize. I'm being very much, disrupted by this music out here. I am picking up and just moving it to the education center, so you're all going to walk with me. Yeah, and I kind of agree. I've always been about experiences, and not always the good experiences. It's not always those ones that shape us. Sometimes it's the negative experiences too. So I'm kind of right there with you. I think that they can both coexist, most definitely. As a matter of fact, they have to. Now, okay, sorry about that. How that pertains to war, though, that's kind of a different issue. Robinson, how did you perceive that quote?
Well, I guess the visual of the butterflies and the lush green vegetation under this, this translucent canopy that Kepler had created, I think it signified a healing, right? So he was there. He was one of the survivors, and he had somehow found the ability to get through all of the things that the other veterans were still holding on to, and achieve peace. But there was a healing, at least in my mind, when I witnessed the scene and thought about it. I think it symbolized healing, and of course, there was kind of an odd transition to the ceremony with the local people releasing candles, releasing I don't know what you call those paper candles into the sky, and the symbolism that it was the symbolism that it was letting the bad stuff go, so to speak, and he had gotten Scott to release his own lantern. So that was a little bit, I think, short. So it wasn't super clear what was happening there, other than Scott was releasing something bad that he had been carrying. And it appeared that Kepler had been able to achieve that. He stayed in this spot that was so traumatic to all of the other main characters in the movie, and so central to the theme of the movie. But I just saw that he had achieved a healing peace with regard to the event. And he created this place to symbolize that. Others could visualize it, others could come there. And he had talked about that with Huffman, that these veterans would come and visit him so they could release this negative baggage that had been hanging on them since their experience there.
And as I'm listening to you, I do have questions that go right down that line. And I was trying to think, well, do I go with Scott first, or do I go with the veterans first? But you kind of segued nicely into it when you mentioned baggage.
Can I just offer an observation?
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead, Chris.
I think it's perhaps worth noting that Avalon is an important aspect of the King Arthur legend, because Avalon is the location where King Arthur was taken to heal after he was severely wounded in battle. So this notion of this being, when he refers to it as Avalon, I think that's the illusion that the director wanted to create in this, that this was a place of healing, much like for King Arthur.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, he's really the only one who healed. The other veterans, they're still struggling in varying degrees, obviously. And when Robinson had mentioned baggage, the first thing I thought of was Roy Mott, Ed Harris's character. And I thought it was one of my favorite lines from the movie was when he was talking about how he got back from Vietnam and he was in the hospital, but his mom had his stuff and packed it into his duffel bag. And after he got out of the hospital, he never unpacked it. And I want to get everybody's take on the metaphorical concept of that, as from Roy Mott's perspective as a person. Did anybody else take that the way I did as far as unpacking baggage, not only literally his duffel bag, but also mentally as well? Lisa, go ahead.
Go ahead, John.
Well, I didn't. I just thought he was just trying to, or his mother may have just tried to put it out of sight. It's gone. It's done. Let's not talk about it. The stigma of veterans that came back and how they were treated was just, let's not talk about it.
Well, and that's kind of what he did though with his mental side of the whole thing, is he packed it all away, and he never unpacked it. And sometimes we have to unpack those negative feelings, those bad experiences, in order to look at them from a different perspective and come to grips with them. And that's something, that he didn't do, and he never did until I think maybe even after he left his Purple Heart at Scott's home on his table after they had this conversation. He gets it back later on in the film, but I think that after that, he did take time to start unpacking that mental baggage, laying it out in front of him, seeing what it was, and dealing with it piece by piece, much as he would his duffel bag. You pull your hat out, and there's a blood stain on it, or a uniform, and you just start remembering these things. And I just thought that metaphorical device that the director used with the baggage itself, I thought that was kind of clever. And like I said, that was my favorite line from the film.
I thought it was kind of interesting that the baggage was even saved.
Yeah.
I mean, instead of keeping it as this metaphorical image of something being preserved over time, like his mental images were, I was kind of thinking that it was kind of odd to me that because this had been such a bad experience for him, that he hadn't just discarded the thing entirely, tossed it into the dumpster or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's that hope that one day you'll have enough courage, to go after. You don't have it yet, and maybe you never will. But fingers crossed, maybe someday you'll have that courage. So hope, I guess, can be a dangerous thing sometimes. Another line from Star Wars. Sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
Oh, I think that kind of the duffel bag, also it had a place and it was distant. And I think that the men who were back in the States, it's kind of like the death of James Dean or the death of Marilyn Monroe. They stay in that image that we saw of them when they died, because they're distant, and they were distant from that. Kemper, he was in Vietnam. No, where was? Yeah.
Yeah, he was right there at the site. He never left.
And he was there when it was ugly, and then he changed and grew with the changes that occurred over the period of time. He was in it instead of being distant and trying to keep it out, where the other people tried to keep it out and it kept poking at them.
Yeah,
no, that's you got to ask, did he really let it go? I mean, he's living there. Did he really let it go?
Oh, I know, from Kepler's point of view.
It's, every coin's got two sides. He said he let it go, but he's living right there. It's, anyway, he seemed to have found the path to release some of those things, release that duffel bag. And he said he helped other vets that came over to him, and he helped them let it out. So.
I think he let that time period go. He changed. He was in that place. He stayed in that place, and that place changed, and he changed with it.
Yeah, and I like that idea that you put out there, Lisa, of distance as well. If you get further away from something that's negative, it's much easier just to kind of block it off, as opposed to being right there in the mix all the time, like Kepler was, and having to deal with it. No, that's a great observation. I'm gonna definitely take a note of that. What about Scott himself? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just the thing. Last weekend I celebrated, and a friend of mine, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of our commissionings back in '71. Of course, that's post-Vietnam. So we tried to invite some friends from the ROTC years before me, plus veterans. So we had guys who had served in Korea, and 3 guys who served in Vietnam. 2 of them were basically in the rear. They brought their uniforms. The 3rd guy, who was a advisor to a Vietnamese battalion in the '70s, he didn't bring anything to remind him of the war. So he didn't bring any photographs, nothing. Everybody else brought something. So part of that baggage that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. That's a real life example. If I could just ask real quick, and I'm certainly not asking you to be a psychologist, but is his mental state, is he okay? Has he accepted what happened and where he's at in life now?
Yeah, no, he's I know him from church, so but he's not ashamed of anything he did. And actually, it's kind of interesting. He married a woman who was an anti-war activist later on. Their son decides to join the ROTC and now is in the reserve. So I'm just thinking that, she went against her parents. So don't expect, don't be surprised if sometimes your kids go against you. So I'm looking at her and she's, oh, why would he do that? Well, what do you think you did? So
no, but to answer your question, the man doesn't have any mental problems. I mean, when he came back, he went to law school, he became a lawyer, very active in the community. So there's nothing like that. But again, what he just said, maybe because his wife is more of a peacenik, she didn't want any of that at home, or because he was more in the trenches, he wanted to shelve it away, while the other 2 guys had a relatively, as they were explaining it, really good experience in Vietnam. I mean, one guy was on the tennis team for the Army, the other one was driving his bears. I mean, it sounded real plush. So they were the 2 that brought all their regalia, their medals, their hats.
Well, I'm certainly not going to judge anybody's wartime experience, but yeah, that does sound kind of cushy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
On the tennis team. Wow.
well, so was what was his name? William Ash. He was the first famous black tennis player. I think he got commissioned, and that's all he did was play tennis. He never led a platoon or did anything like that. But
What the heck?
Arthur Ashe.
Arthur Ashe.
Yeah. There's all different
I was
kinds of
on
jobs in the Army. And,
I was on the beer drinking team.
I've talked to kids all over the place, as I go and give lectures or what have you with the different museum opportunities. And, they ask, well, what do you do in the Army? What do you do in the military? And I tell them, for every job that's in the civilian world, there's that job in the military too. So, everybody has their own experience, that's for sure. I will get back to the veterans, but I kind of want to look at Scott real quick. We haven't really talked much about him. Obviously, when we first meet him, his motivations are very selfish. He's only looking to climb that political ladder. He doesn't want this assignment, and quite honestly, the quicker he could just get it off his desk, especially once he realizes that he's maybe up for this promotion, the happier he is. But as he starts digging and he starts getting into you know, the true, this, I don't know when, I don't say the true story, but at least the story that's told to us through the film, he does start to kind of care a little bit. But when he starts interviewing the veterans, he does get pushback from them, each and every one of them. Maybe bordering on disrespect, but not quite disrespect, but certainly animosity. How did he deal with this? Not only in the beginning, but as the movie progresses?
I think he gets more and more, he gains respect for veterans the more and more he has contact with them. And I think he begins to understand that there was a disservice done to many of them, that they came back very messed up and it was never dealt with or recognized. So I think his respect level for them just escalated with each contact.
I think he gained a real appreciation about what it meant to be the FNG.
Yes.
Both in
Yes.
his life and in the war zone.
That's a valid point.
Yep.
And I know Robinson said he served. I was in. Chris, you were in. John, you were in, weren't you?
Yes.
And
drinking
Lori's
team, right?
as well. We were all the FNG at one point.
Oh, yeah.
We all know what that felt like.
I remember the first day I reported,
Yeah.
the guy came running up to me and he was nasty, dirty, bad uniform. He said, "You're the guy." I said, "What do you mean?" "Your name's across from mine. I'm short and I'm going home. You're replacing me." I thought, okay. And that's how I started.
You still keep in contact with the guy?
No, there's only one guy I served with that I still have contact with, but that was 52 years ago. Yeah. So
all this animosity that Scott's getting from the veterans, is it warranted, do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they tried for 30 years to get something done about this, and they've been ignored for 30 years. So there is, they kind of shrug their shoulders, say, "Who are you? You know, I mean, what are you going to do for us? Nothing as usual." So I'm surprised they even opened up to him and told their story.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have, I would have just said, "Go away." So,
as well as the borders that 30 years worth of questions about what did you do over there built up.
Yeah.
Who are you to ask me? I'm not going to tell you.
yeah.
So they built that up over the years. So it's that, and I think it was the second of the Samuel L. Jackson character that said the initial guy that went to see him, the master sergeant, had called ahead. So he was given a warning that this guy was coming. And I think that's probably the only reason he got in the door to talk to them, as he was introduced, if you will, to all of them by phone saying, "Hey, he's coming. He's going to question you. It's not for you. It's for Pitts." So I think that's why they talked to him. Otherwise, probably just thrown him out.
Yeah, I think one thing that did come through very clearly in the movie was the initial lack of enthusiasm that Scott exhibited when he was assigned the project, when he discussed the project within the walls of the Pentagon, and when he conducted his initial interviews. The skepticism shown by the veterans, and they didn't go too deeply into this. I think it was tied, as I think it was John and Karen had mentioned, to the 32 years of nothing, right? No results. And they didn't tell us how many other aides had been sent out on this mission to get their stories, but it seemed like there were quite a few. So the skepticism apparently was warranted, and Scott's own lack of enthusiasm and feigned interest did nothing to help those veterans share their story. But I think, I felt like as I was watching his individual interviews, you could see this gradual change in him as he heard the stories, and he felt the power of the connection these survivors had with what was Airman's Pitsenbarger's first name. I don't remember his first name, but anyway, with this gentleman who they're seeking to have this medal awarded to, I think he realized, wait a minute, this is something far greater than me, and it's far greater than the other things that I have been focused on at this point. And then he started to see some of the corruption when his buddy had apparently removed documents from the from the paperwork, and he found them in his office. So I saw that gradual transition, which led to a decrease in the skepticism on the part of the veterans, but an increase in his own enthusiasm and his own sincerity, which did shine through in his discussions with not just Pitsenbarger's family, but also the other veterans. And I think that was a shift that it wasn't a sudden shift, but it was a shift that was apparent as the movie went on.
Yeah, especially when he turned down that choice job, right to the interviewee or the interviewer's faces. He's, yeah, okay, I'm done. Bye. So yeah, definitely there was that. Lisa, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I read through your questions before watching, and one word that kept coming to mind to me, and then it was funny because Kemper used it, was perspective. So all of these individuals have a perspective, an experience, a hellacious experience, and it's been carried with them. And is it Huffman? Scott? Is his name Scott?
Scott, yeah, Huffman.
Yeah. And he when you haven't touched that, you just don't have it. You don't have it. So he was beginning to learn that through them, just like maybe you don't have a firsthand experience, but you read a book and you learn something through the book. You gain something. But just and I know I'll just go back to it, but like grief, I have never known what grief is until now, and it's just something until you experience, I mean, to this level. Of course, you have grief through life when you lose things or you don't win or what, but not to this extent. So it's just something that it's perspective.
Yeah. And I'm curious, just to kind of follow up with this portion of the conversation. And as Robinson said, he eventually started to gain that perspective. He started to change his frame of reference and look at it from a different side, the veteran side. But what do you think was the turning point? Was there a certain spot in the movie when you're like, this is it right here. This is where he's going to, this one thing did it for him. Did you find that in the film somewhere? I know I did.
I think it was when Frank took him through his son's bedroom, and so there was a very deep. I think it was a deep moment for everybody who was in the scene, Frank, his wife, and Scott, as he reflected on all of these memories that he experienced with his son, and also the grief for the memories he will never experience for his son. And I think that's where it hit Scott right in the heart, having his own little boy who's at an age where he's doing the things that Frank was describing, and then realizing that, wait a minute, Frank has a very limited time left on this earth. And Scott himself, I think at that point understood he was empowered with the ability to at least do everything possible to try and make this happen. To give this man who just shared this immense love for his son something that could give him some closure before he passed. That's what I felt was the turning point in the movie. I think things were building up to that point, but that was, I think, the most profound moment for Scott.
Okay.
I thought that was the turning point, and then it was fully crystallized for him when he started reading those letters that were given to him. That had been written. That you hear him, you see him talking with his wife about it, and I think that's when he starts in that bedroom scene, and then it sort of builds for him, and then those letters just really kind of bring it full bore to him.
Sally, how about you? Did you find a spot in the movie where you thought maybe that this is where his moment comes?
Well, I was very touched. And I never thought of it. Of course, I'm a mom, I'm not a dad. I always think that moms love their kids more than dads. I don't know where I get that from. But
That's
he
okay.
said,
Dads think they love their kids more than the mom, so.
yeah, there we go. Hey, but we carried him for 9 months.
Yeah.
When his dad said, we never got to see him have a child. We never got to see him understand how much we loved him. And I thought that was very moving for me.
Yeah, you know, not to kind of belabor the point, but you know, there's always this certain element that comes across in movies that I see from time to time. And Lisa, we're all definitely sorry for your loss, most
Yes.
certainly. But the thing is, I hope that I never have to bury any of my children. I hope they have to bury me. I cannot imagine what kind of,
No.
I don't even want to try to imagine what that would feel like to have to bury your child. And there's a great line in, I can't remember the movie now, but it's in Troy, the movie Troy. And the king says, no father should have to bury his child. And then, so that scene, especially like you were talking about, Robinson and Sally as well, where they're in the bedroom and he's going over all these things that he's never going to get to do with his son. I found that really, that was kind of a hard scene to watch, to be
Yes, it
quite honest.
was.
I don't find much hard to watch, but I thought that was a little tough. And Robinson, I agree with you. You know, that for me, that was his point as well, was when he was talking to Pitt's father in the bedroom there, and his mother came in as well. And then right after that, he was at home with his son. And to use Chris's words, I thought that's really what crystallized it right there, was he's taking these experiences from these folks and he's looking at his kid going, God, I hope I don't have those experiences. You know, what can I do? How can I make this right? And then, of course, you know, at the end of the movie, he does make it right. And as I put in the question, you know, does Scott give his last full measure at the end of the film? The obvious answer is yes. But I think more importantly, who does he give it for? Who does he give that last full measure? Who's he doing this for the whole time?
Well, I think it's father. He's doing it so that he gets something or sees something that his son did before he dies of cancer. I think that was one of his main driving forces, that he wanted to do that for him.
Okay. Lisa, how about you?
Say it again.
So Scott makes this happen at the end. He gets the Medal of Honor awarded, and he goes through all this work. But who's he really doing the work for?
I think, like you said, when he was, changing, and then it was a moment of change. I think that was like a level, but I don't think he really changed until, because he still was going to go backward and take the new position and leave it and everything. Wasn't secure until he was sat at the table and heard from Pitt's father how they were going to achieve this together, is when then we didn't hear any more about him going, back, but he was still contemplating that. So I think he just changed, or he did it for the men, but I just think he also did it maybe for himself too, because his relationship with his father that he had harbored so long, and then he let his lantern go.
Anybody else have a take on that?
I agree with Lisa. I think it was trifold. He did it for the dad, and he did it for himself, and he did it for those veterans.
Yeah, I personally, I think he did it. I think he did it more for himself, and not to say that that's a selfish motivation, because it certainly isn't, especially when it causes yourself to expand and become more of a whole person, to really understand and sympathize with people. which he didn't seem to have those characteristics at the beginning of the movie. And then, part and parcel with himself. And again, this it's not a selfish thing, but I think his son is included in that. He wants to be a better father for his son. And I think this whole experience, really pushed him to be that better person. Certainly, he wants to help the vets out. And certainly he wants, Pitt's father, he wants him to have this. He wants Pitts to have this. But I think just myself, I think he did it for himself.
Yeah, but the supplemental information that you gave, I mean, if he gets 5 months after he's killed, he does get the Air Force Cross. And then you've got these other things listed out. I mean, so the movie makes it look like nobody recognized his heroism. And this was the first one, but actually reading through the notes that you made, he was honored. His parents at least saw that there was some recognition for his sacrifice, maybe not the highest, but then of course the Medal of Honor does have certain, not everybody gets it. And that may seem unfair, but it's not. The movie made it portraying like he was totally unrecognized, and I think that's a bit of unfairness. But of course, that's Hollywood, as you mentioned, and history takes a back seat.
Yeah, and like Chris said, he's one of the lucky ones that has these Blu-ray editions with all the extras. And I'm not complaining at all. I'm a little jealous, and I'm very fortunate that you do join us, Chris, because to quote Lisa's term, you do bring that perspective. Those things that we don't get to see. And so the research that you did showing that, the movie really didn't follow the lines of the true story. There wasn't these bad guys hiding this information. It was bureaucracy at its finest. You're never going to be able to push this thing through because nobody's willing to put themselves out there like that.
Apparently, the real story was that he was recommended for the Medal of Honor, and at the higher level, it was rejected because they didn't have enough documentation at the time. So it was downgraded to the Air Medal. And then for the next 30 years, the people who knew about this had kind of dispersed around and didn't have contact with each other. And it wasn't until the internet came around, and then there was an article written in, I guess, the Air Force magazine about Pittsburgher that propelled them to come back together and push for this. And it turned out, I mean, they had this senator character who had the sleazy aide that was doing all that stuff. Turns out that but it turned out that once they were able to gather the additional documentation, it was actually former Speaker of the House John Boehner that became the congressional sponsor for the medal. And it went forward very smoothly from that point on. But it really had more to do with the fact that they were concerned with the lack of documentation at the time that the original recommendation was made. And then it just kind of languished because there was nobody around to push for it after that, until again the internet became available and all these guys could get back in contact with each other.
Interesting.
I was going to say, in terms of, you mentioned the Blu-ray edition, there's a fascinating website, and you can use it for almost any movie. It's called History versus Hollywood. So I looked it up, and there's just a whole lot of questions. And I think one of the most interesting ones that they posed was, did Pittsburgher always want to be a pararescueman? And the answer was no. He wanted to be a Green Beret and join the Army, but his parents wouldn't allow him to do that. So then when he finally graduated from school, he decided to join the Air Force. So there's all kinds of little nitty gritty, cute, interesting facts about it. And they also brought up some information about, Scott Huffman. Like one of the questions was he a real person? Well, no, he wasn't, but they felt that he was based on a historian named Parker Hayes, who was writing the story, who was writing a book about Pittsburgher. And he, was kind of like the impetus for the character of Scott Huffman. But it also said that this historian did a lot of interviewing of veterans, and he himself became involved in the push and the thrust to try to get the medal bestowed on Pitts. So mark that down in your notes. History versus Hollywood.
Yeah, I use that site when I feel particularly stuck. I feel like I'm kind of cheating if I use that, since I'm the one who's supposed to be putting all this together. But I will go there if I'm feeling stuck. I didn't have to use it for this one. Maybe I should have. I maybe would have got some of that perspective. So we talked about the veterans. We talked about we touched on Pitts's parents. We also touched on Scott's relationship with everybody else, and his home relationship too. But one character we haven't really talked about very much at all is Pitts himself. Do you think the film did a good job of developing the character and really putting him out there for the audience to connect with?
I feel it was a little weak on that. I would have liked to know much more about him.
Okay.
But on the other,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, but on the other hand, when he landed, these guys didn't. The Charlie Company didn't know anything about him. All they did was just have that 6 or 7 hours, and then they lost him. So they wouldn't have known a lot about him, except the thing that was most important, the fact that he took over for the other medic and saved a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, good point. So you think maybe the director set it up so that we kind of get the feel of Charlie Company as far as what we know about this guy? We're kind of in the same boat as they are. We don't know him from Adam, except for just what we're seeing in this combat situation.
Interesting thoughts.
Yeah. That would be an interesting and intentional thing for the director to do, and it makes sense. But there was no character development for Pitts, basically nothing. I mean, the most you learn about him is when Scott is visiting the family's home and talking about him. But and of course, the action's on the battlefield, but there was I felt no character development at all. And maybe that was the point. The point was to focus on the actions over that 6 or 7 hour period because it was about the selflessness of this man and the impact of that selflessness on the lives of everyone around him. But I would have been interested in learning a little bit more about him. He seemed like a pretty cool guy from the little they did share. And not my call, but it could have been intentional, as the other gentleman said. His name didn't show up on my screen.
I would have felt that it was intentional as well. I felt I learned or knew about Pitts by the stories of all the other veterans who saw him on the battlefield. And I felt I got to know him that way, not probably on a personal level, with other character development, but I did feel that I knew him through his actions as seen by all the other vets there. So I was okay with that.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I sort of had the sense that what the director was trying to do was present him as an ordinary man doing extraordinary thing. And so if you do too much character development, he doesn't come across as ordinary. And I think that kind of contributed to the extraordinariness of what he did.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent way to look at it, for sure. I didn't see it that way initially, but the second time when I watched it, I started to get that sense. I tried to find some interviews with the director about this movie, or the cinematographer. It's really hard to get anything but reviews for this film. I couldn't even find production notes. So I was a little disappointed in that. I had to work a lot harder for these questions and for this segment for this movie than I've had to in the past, really. So we said that, the only time we really get to know Pitts' character is through those battle sequences. What did you think of those battle sequences? And do you think that the director served himself well by interspersing them through the movie, as opposed to maybe tackling it all at once?
I like them interspersed because I felt it gave each veteran's perspective of the battle versus, what just was filming a battle. So I liked it interspersed.
Yeah, the story, they told the story and then it was reinforced with a quick battle scene. Kind of-
I like that.
It's the reinforcement of their story. So, I think it served its purpose.
But and it also showed, as I think was mentioned earlier, the relationship between each veteran and Pitts for the short amount of time that they might have interacted, in quotes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I personally, I thought I didn't care much for the battle sequences from a movie making standpoint. I didn't think they were shot particularly well. I don't think they were acted particularly well. And maybe I'm just spoiled because I'm used to seeing, Robert Duvall in Apocalypse Now, or, just some really great battle sequences or war sequences. And I just don't think this measured up from a filmmaking perspective. I thought the acting was a little stiff in those battle sequences. Certainly the guy who was portraying Samuel L. Jackson as a Vietnam soldier in Vietnam does not have the same chops as Samuel L. Jackson himself. So just from that perspective, that's how I was viewing that. And we are starting to get low on time. I do want to talk a little bit more about the movie making process itself, which you notice for the first time in my questions, there was really no questions about the movie making process. There wasn't a whole lot that was put into this film as far as that goes. I think maybe the battle sequences were probably the most difficult thing to film. Everything else was shot in a bedroom or an office. So there's really not a whole lot of notes from me on the production value, cinematography, directing, and it's not a negative. I didn't really find a whole lot to talk about in that regard, which is kind of unfortunate, except for the fact that, I didn't think the battle sequences were done particularly well. But I do, and I hope I don't offend anybody. I'm certainly not trying to, and I'm not trying to say one way or the other about this film, but I'm just curious, and I'm trying to decide which question to go to. I asked it here, but I think I found it a little bit better. This film had its heart in the right place, but it came across as, for me anyway, a little melodramatic. The characters seemed kind of cobbled together, and Chris even pointed out to maybe how it was kind of cliche. The characters were kind of cliche. And moving that just a little bit further, I'll ask the question that I asked in the original set. Do you think this film was really relying heavily on a sense of flag-waving patriotism to get its box office receipts? Or do you think that the story was gripping enough on its own merits to succeed in that? Go ahead, Lisa.
I think it was on the patriotism, but also on the actors. Like, there were like high level actors in there, but it felt very, I'll use your word this time, stilted a lot through the movie. It was a little uncomfortable. I don't know if that's the word. It was odd watching it. Sometimes it just felt like you weren't getting enough from these people. It was just like
or maybe too much
put in there.
I think it was the last movie Chris brought up. We're going to start calling you Mr. Blu-ray, but you said that in the Blu-ray there were a lot of scenes that were cut and background development that wasn't there. And going through this movie, I felt that it was a long film that they shortened up to make it for the box office. I mean, he 1 minute is saying, I'm not going to Vietnam, and the next minute he's there. That's like a 15-hour flight from the West Coast. There's a lot of Phil in there. He's riding in the back of a pickup truck in Vietnam. There seemed to be a lot of development on storylines that weren't there.
And
I thought he
kind
was
of on
going
that
to-
point, John, I thought the ending was just like that.
Okay.
You know, the last 2 minutes before the ceremony was what? I don't know, 6 months, a year prior to the ceremony itself. It just abruptly went from the story to, oh shoot, we got to hurry up and finish this film ceremony. It was just such a quick transition. It was so abrupt. And so, yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because as you reminded me of that as you were talking about the flight to Vietnam.
Right.
It's just all of a sudden, poof, the plane's landing.
He was looking for Samuel L. Jackson's house, and the next thing he's caught him fishing on the river with his grandkids. You know, there was a disconnect there.
Sure.
And then a very in-depth, detailed story of the battle scene, and then he sprung on to the next move. It just kind of didn't flow real well that way.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with both John and Lisa in that it felt like there was probably a 3.5 to 4 hour movie that had been edited down to an hour and a half, and too many important transitions were removed. So it was very jolted at points. I think also going back to the combat scenes, I've been biased, of course, since movies like Saving Private Ryan came out, where it's horrible, right? It's so real, you almost feel like you're there. And this was almost like a B level production for the battle scenes. But I think the $20 million budget went to the actors more than anything. There were some, I mean, there were A-list actors in there. And as an Easter egg, I don't know if anybody caught it, but in the audience during the ceremony for the award of the Medal of Honor, if you all remember that TV show Chips, California Highway Patrol, the Poncherelli's boss is got a cameo and he's in the audience, and the camera pans over him twice. I had to go back and look at that. He doesn't say a word, but he's there for 3 seconds of this film, and I'm thinking, wow, they even paid this guy to come on and have a cameo. I liked it, but it was very jolted, and you really had to make some big assumptions in certain points of the movie as scenes were transitioning.
I think part of the problem here was that the writer-director was overlaying a lot of fiction on top of what is I think is an inherently interesting story. That if he just stuck with the facts and spent more time, say, on the battle scenes and that kind of thing, he wouldn't have had to introduce characters that did not exist or create a conspiracy that didn't exist, and could have just built this story about a guy who deserved recognition, had not gotten it, and finally got it.
Yeah, it could have been the real story. I'm a little rubbed the wrong way since you've said that they created that friction that had to be there. It just I don't know, Lisa.
I thought it was a little crazy that Ed Harris character, they just really played up the bus driver thing. A lot.
He didn't have a car.
Right.
Take a bus to the White
House. The ceremony in the bus.
Played up a lot. Like they even did the interview on the bus with the kids messing around in the back.
Right, they did.
Okay, we just have a couple minutes left. I just want to go around the room real quick. The question I always ask, who is everybody's favorite character and why? Chris, we'll start with you because you're the first one on my screen there.
I don't know that I had a favorite character. There were characters I disliked, but not a favorite character. But I kind of thought that Huffman's wife was, even though she wasn't on very often, she was kind of a stabilizing force for him. And I think it helped to move him into the position where he started to really care about what was happening.
John, Karen?
Well, I'm partial to the Butterfly Man. Can't believe it. Okay.
I like the dad. He was just, he tugged my heartstrings, and Christopher Plummer. I think
this is the last movie that he was in before he died. So
yeah. So and he will be missed. I think he was a good actor, and I just like the role he played, so he would be my favorite.
Robinson?
I of course have thought Christopher Plummer has been a fantastic actor since my mother made me watch The Sound of Music as a little boy. But he's a classy actor. But my favorite was Samuel L. Jackson. He's
Me
Samuel
too.
L. Jackson.
Me
And he's
too.
just, I mean, he's really good in everything he does, and he somehow does it naturally. So I liked Mr. Jackson.
Sally?
I agree. I liked the dad, and I really liked Samuel L. Jackson. He's just so, I know he's an actor, but he just plays every part so real. I could just see some guy cussing and smoking and, you know, talking about his time in Vietnam and pretty much telling everybody to shove it.
And still babysitting his grandkids as they're fishing on the river.
Yeah, a nice guy who, you know, can say it like it is.
Lisa?
I'm with Chris that I had to work on this one pretty hard, but I go with John. It's I know a small part, but I like the butterfly guy because he was able to find some peace or grow into some peace.
And then last but not least, Jan?
Well, let's see. I'm going to go with Plummer. The interesting thing, Scott, wasn't he in West Wing?
No, that's if I'm not mistaken, that's a different guy altogether. They do
Yeah.
look similar.
Yeah, so
I don't think that was him.
The West Wing guy was his boss, Bradley Whitford.
Yeah, he was in.
He was in West.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I think, you know, just like Chris and Lisa, I had a hard time trying to find a favorite character.
Who's your favorite actor?
I'll go with Captain Dale Dye on this one. I'm really impressed that he was able to take his military career and, you know, basically build his own Hollywood company out of it, and then get into the movies themselves. As he's advising, he's also acting. And I think he's become kind of a decent actor as he's gone along. You know, you see him, he's a helicopter pilot along with Arlie Ermey in Apocalypse Now. And to see him, you know, make his way up through the ranks and start having a little bit bigger roles, I think he's turned into not too terrible of an actor. So I'll say Captain Dale Dye. So I had to move from my office. I have no more of my technology with me except my laptop here. So please, somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Next month, we are watching Paths of Glory, yes?
Yeah.
Awesome. That is quite arguably one of my favorite films of all time. It is World War I. It is black and white. It is Stanley Kubrick. And it's also Mr.
Michael Douglas. Michael Douglas.
Kirk Douglas.
Oh, Kirk Douglas.
Kirk
Yeah.
Douglas.
So I'm really excited about this one coming up. You are definitely going to have production questions when this movie comes around. And if you guys haven't figured this out yet, I focus more on the cinematography than I do directing. And this one has some really fine cinematographic elements that I would love to talk about. I won't bore everybody to death and just talk about the cinematography when we next month. But look forward to this film. It's going to be fantastic. If you have not seen it, it's just great.
As I recall, Lou Ayres has a role in this, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was as a result of being in that movie that he became an anti-war conscientious objector during World War II.
Yeah.
Yeah, the movie's from the 50s, was it?
Was it? I thought
Yeah,
it was.
the movie was from the 50s. He played the young German soldier in All Quiet on the Western Front.
I'm sorry, that's the one. Yeah, that's the one.
I think it's a 60s movie, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Oh no, you're right, 57, just on the cusp. Okay. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to next month. Hopefully, well, not hopefully, I know I picked a better movie than what we've come across the past couple months. But you know, sometimes you got to go through some of the bad to get to the really good, right?
I like the both of them.
They're all fun.
They are.
Thanks for everybody for joining me tonight.
Thank
It was
you.
a great conversation once again. I was getting ready to come to the office, and my stepdaughter goes, "Ha ha, you got to go back to work." I'm like, "Yeah, but I get to go talk about movies for an hour. How do you not love that?" So you can make fun of me all you want. I'm doing something that you're jealous of.
These discussions are actually the best part of the movies.
Yeah.
I'll take that as a compliment, Chris. Thank you. And a compliment to all of you as well. You guys make these discussions really good. You guys could just sit there and look at me and wait for me to say something, but you all are really attentive. You're just ready to answer, and you all watch these movies with your own ideas and opinions, and you bring those to the table when we have these, and it really shows. So I do appreciate that. It just makes this a joy doing this a Friday night every month. So